Hi everyone, this is Renee from Meadowlark Mystic, and today I'm doing a video on some of my non-Rider-Waite tarot decks. So in my last video I talked about my pip decks and how the Wild Unknown was one of the decks that kind of opened up my eyes to a different way of looking at the minors. And so then I thought, well, it would be fun to go through my collection and talk about non-Rider-Waite decks. Those are the decks, well, in any case, I'm just going to talk about them. So let me get the first one, which is the Wild Unknown. And this is the mass market edition. So the cardstock is pretty good. And I was going to do a video also on, oops, it's all upside down. I have modified this deck, but I'm going to do a separate video on that. Okay, I have to come up with a different way of looking at these cards. So the Wild Unknown is was a really popular, it still is a really popular deck. But the way that it interpreted the quartz and the way that it interprets, so this is kind of a good example. So the Five of Cups is often a card of sadness and loss, but this depiction doesn't show the traditional individual looking at the, the spilled cups with the cloak and the water passing by. It's this really sad horse. So, it asks you, the Wild Unknown asks you to look at the major arcana, but also specifically for me, the pips, in a different way. So this would be the 8, that kind of sense of being bound and in a precarious situation, right, with all those swords, but with also the chance of freedom. So that is the Wild Unknown, and that was one of my first decks that was non-Rider-Waite, that kind of opened up my eyes to the idea of pips, but also one of my first non-Rider-Waite. The next deck I wanted to talk about is the Victorian Fairy. This deck has non-traditional depictions, so this is the Two of Summer. I mean, you can get what they're saying. So I'm not saying that these are totally new interpretations, but they're just new illustrations. So like, for example, this is the 10 of Autumn, so it'd be the 10 of Pentacles. Unfortunately, I just heard that this deck is out of print, but I do see it come up for trade and for sale on the trade groups on Facebook. So that's Tarot Swap and Tarot Marketplace, and also Buy Sell Trade Tarot. So that is the Victorian Fairy Tarot. It's another one of my non-Rider-Waite decks. The next one I wanted to talk about is this large Tarot de Paris. I bought this used because it's also out of print, but I really enjoy how it utilizes murals and mostly sculptures from around Paris. So this one, for example, it is kind of a collage deck too, which I like. This is the 6 of Matter, so Matter is the 6 of Pentacles, and there's a giving and a taking going on in this card. The Angel, so that would be Judgment. 4 of Matter, so it's the 4 of Pentacles. I like how this figure has no head. The Hanged One, or the Question. 4 of Fire, obviously that's the 4 of Wands. So again, a different interpretation of the majors and the minors. So the Veil, that's the High Priestess. 8 of Water, that would be the 8 of Cups. 9 of Fire. Equilibrium, this is Justice. And the Empress is called Nature. The King of Fire. I'm trying to, what am I looking for? I guess we looked up Initiation, so this is the Magician. Six of Fire. Water. So I really like this deck for its non-Rider-Waite interpretation of cards. This next one is called the Illuminated. Where did I put that book? Oh. It's this, the Illuminated Tarot. So this is not a full tarot deck, but I really like how they have, or she has, done the cards. Well, I don't know what I'm doing with these cards. Okay, so this is the Queen of Hearts, which I think is also the Empress. So what she did was she doubled up on some of the cards. Some of the majors are incorporated into the minors. So for example, this card, the Eight of Swords, is also Justice. This is the Nine of Pentacles, or the Nine of Diamonds. And this is the Eight of Hearts, which I think is also the Moon. I added quite a bit to this card. Oh, and the Two of Hearts is Temperance, I think. Anyway, if you're interested in this deck, just know that she's taken the majors and incorporated them into the minors, so, you know, there aren't just majors. They're part of the minor suit. So the deck is smaller, but I like it. And it's also, I've also trimmed it. I was thinking about doing a deck, a video on my modifications that I've done. That's the Eight of Clubs. But I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. And anyway, that's the Illuminated Tarot by Keegan. The next deck I want to show for my non-Rider-Waite is the Chinese Tarot. I've talked about this deck quite a bit on my channel. I love it so much. It incorporates a lot of Chinese poets and storytellers and just famous religious figures and cultural heroes, so Confucius. But I particularly like how the sword suit is not as dark as the Rider-Waite Smith. Lisa from Tarot Alchemist has been doing a really interesting series on the chakras, and this last one I just watched was on the heart chakra and how that's related to air and swords. And it totally made sense to me. It also made it a little more accessible why the Rider-Waite Smith sword suit is so dark. But I prefer a more neutral depiction of, you know, the process of the swords, just because there is hope. I mean, the Rider-Waite Smith is so dark, but, you know, you can figure out thought processes that do facilitate more connection and heart opening rather than heart closing and shutting down. You know, this is the Three of Swords, which for me is one of the cards that I find most difficult in the Rider-Waite, that the heart pierced just doesn't give me much. I mean, obviously sorrow, but I don't know, there's just a lot more to talk about and think about. So that is the Chinese Tarot, and I really appreciate its non-Rider-Waite depictions. The next one is the Vibrant Spirit Tarot. And this one, unfortunately, is also out of print, but every once in a while it will come up. This is non-Rider-Waite, obviously. You've got the Four of Cups, but it also has keywords at the bottom, which I really like for some reason. And usually I don't like keywords. But occasionally I think they're really fun. So this deck is quirky and strange, and I really like it. So that is the Vibrant Spirit. These are the backs. The next deck I'm just going to talk about really quick because I featured it on my channel quite a bit, and that's the Connolly Tarot. The reason I think that this is non-Rider-Waite, it does have a lot in common with the Rider-Waite Smith, but just, you know, certain things are different. Like there's another figure here, and you know, like this is the Ten of Wands, and I like how its interpretation is different. He's planting. And then this is really awesome. 9 of Swords. It's just a more empowering take on especially the sword suit, which I really appreciate. You know, and this is the 4 instead of the person sleeping. So that's the Connolly Tarot, and I really do love how it is a different interpretation. The next one I want to talk about was one of my first decks. This is not that deck. This is the Czech edition of the Shadowscapes. So this deck is definitely non-Rider-Waite, but beautiful in its depictions of the cards. And it also forced me outside of my comfort zone when I got the deck. I realized I was going to have to really broaden my interpretation and ability to, you know, you can't just memorize the Rider-Waite. Like there's lots of other ways of looking at it. And this is a beautiful, beautiful deck. But I will say the Czech, you know, the Czech on the bottom, the Czech words, you have to know this deck really well in order to be able to read with it confidently. I thought it would be no problem because I had read with this deck quite a bit, but it actually is harder than you might imagine. So just, you know, be aware of that. And that's the Czech edition. I think you can still get it from German sellers if you're interested. The next deck for non-Rider-Waite would be my beloved Chrysalis. So this deck definitely has a different interpretation of the cards. I really like it. I've added to this deck. I've added color to this deck. I've trimmed this deck. I had a very difficult and bumpy ride with this deck in the beginning. I just wanted to understand it, but couldn't. And I think that's why I trimmed it and colored it, and I just kept trying. Like, this is a really interesting and different interpretation of the 9 of Pentacles. Still have the woman, but she looks like she's leaving something behind. Really love this deck. It gives really great, accurate readings. It's a heavy hitter for me, even though it has a really soft palette. And so I only use this deck when I really want to know the answer to something. So that's the Chrysalis Tarot, and I edged it in blue, but I've seen it edged in yellow, like a goldy yellow, and it looked amazing. The next deck is the Nova Tarot. This is a tiny little deck, but I really love its cheeky interpretations of the cards. I just appreciate the way it has reinterpreted things from a non-Rider-Waite. And yeah, I think it's super cute, and it's really accurate too. And I edged it in dark green. That's the Nova Tarot. It's small, and these are the backs. It's reversible. The next deck also I'm just going to do really quickly, and that's the Tarot of Fire. Almost all of these cards, well, definitely all the minors are very different. I have this deck in order, I think, because I was like studying it. And most of them you can figure out what they're going for. A few are like really out there, so you just have to kind of make up your own interpretations. But I really like the dark, evocative art style of this deck. That's the Tarot of Fire. And then the next one is the Arthurian Tarot, and this is the older edition with the seated female on the backs. I really love this deck. It's deep, it's beautiful, it gives incredible readings. yeah, these are all majors. I just really love it. I used to find the art very stiff, and I didn't like it, which was strange, because now I really love it. Yeah, all majors. I don't know. I haven't used this different edition as much as the more standard one. There's Lisa's favorite death card. So yeah, that's the Arthurian Tarot. And like this is Spear 9, so the 9 of Wands. And Sword 4. And 2 of Wands. I just really, this deck is so evocative and beautiful. It's like you enter the doorway. So that is the Arthurian Tarot. So I've done all that. Let me go behind me. The next one is Dame Fortune's Wheel Tarot. And this is by Paul Hewson. It is a really interesting deck. It's got really different depictions. It's kind of like a combination of a Marseille and a Rider-Waite. And all of the courts are historical figures. So like this guy's Caesar. I love the color palette. The interpretations are slightly different from either the Marseille or the Rider-Waite, and I do enjoy that. This is the significator card in the deck. So this was a really good, it broadened my understanding of both Marseille and Rider-Waite interpretations by just trying to read this deck, just trying to understand, what it's trying to tell me. And I really like its kind of old world feeling. The art were taken from really old woodcuts and prints from the 14th, 15th, and 16th century. And then he, reinterpreted them to fit. So that is Dame Fortune's Wheel Tarot. And Dame Fortune's Wheel Tarot looks really great with the Wild Unknown, which is kind of a strange combination. And then some other decks. This deck is the New Century Tarot. I featured this on my channel quite a bit, but I just thought that I would feature it again. So this one is out of print, but I know that you can find, used copies. It's not a particularly popular deck, but I really love it. It has like indications of Rider-Waite-Smith sometimes. Like for example, this is the 8 of Pentacles, which is work. And then you can just see this tiny figure, who's working on something. But I really love this deck. I love the colors. I love the back. I love how this figure, it's like she's had enough. She's just letting go. Her hair's undone. Her shirt's come off. She's just totally releasing and moving to a new thing. So this is the New Century Tarot in English and so I think that the author's German, and Lena from Fire of Transformation told me that it's called the Golden Gomera. And that's the name that the author gave it. And so I don't understand why in English they changed the name, but they did. So that's the New Century Tarot in English, or the Golden Gomera if you buy it in Germany. I've got so many boxes. The next tarot I wanted to talk about is the Gypsy Palace. This is a very strange, quirky, weird deck that I really like. But it definitely forces you to look at the, you know, the Rider-Waite in a totally different way. So that's the Knight of Cups, the Eight of Wands. Sometimes the figures are all like entangled with each other. Judgment. And I like how, you know, it can feel that way. Sometimes it feels like your energy is entangled with other people. Ten of Cups. This deck has strong female characters, which I really appreciate. And then, you know, characters that you're just like kind of an every person character. Knight of Pentacles. Of course, the colors are what drew me to this deck. Eight of Cups. But there is a quirky, fun interpretation. So this is the Ten of Wands, which is usually, you know, the guy and he's walking and he's got that big burden of sticks. And this guy looks, looks like he's got a burden, right? But then there's this hand with this toad that's getting all the flies over his head, and he looks happy. So it's kind of like, you know, there's a way out. You just got to find a solution that works for you. So instead of being really annoyed about the flies, just, you know, get a frog or get a toad or get a spider or get something to help you with that. Anyway, so I really like this deck and its quirkiness. So that is the Gypsy Palace Tarot. Definitely non-Rider-Waite. I also have the Japaritsi here, but it's totally buried now in boxes. So the last one I'm going to feature for non-Rider-Waite is the Tarot of the Crone. And these are the backs. They're just absolutely black. So this would be the Nine of Pentacles. This is the Fool. I've talked about this deck a lot. The Two of Swords. The guidebook is amazing. The artwork at first might seem... Oh, I love this card. So in all the quartz, there's a shadow aspect. I love this. Anyway, the artwork at first might seem, I don't know, not attractive, I guess. But I'm telling you, it grows on you, and it is, these cloaked figures are so powerful, and her restrained color palette. It's just an incredibly powerful deck. You have to get it really in order to understand it. So there's a shadow of all the suits, and then there's the beast. So that would be an animal. And then I'm trying to remember, there's witch. I can't remember the last one. Anyway, so look at the chariot. So this deck is wonderful. I'm trying to find, there's the shadow, the beast, oh, and then grandmother, which I guess would be like the crone of the good justice. There's the high priestess. It's just an amazing deck, and it's definitely non-Rider-Waite, as is the Dark Goddess, which I was going to also showcase, but I think that's enough. I have a lot of non-Rider-Waite Smith decks, and I hope you enjoyed this little journey through my collection. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.